My wife took the house while I was recovering from an accident. But I wasn't done yet. I never saw it coming. Not while I was lying in that hospital bed with 3 fractured ribs, a broken femur, and enough painkillers coursing through my system to make everything seem distant and hazy. The accident had been bad. A delivery truck running a red light while I was crossing the intersection. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive. What they couldn't tell me was that my marriage was already dead. Melissa visited every day for the first week. Her visits grew shorter, her excuses more frequent. I attributed it to stress. We'd been married 11 years, and this wasn't our first challenge. But something in her eyes had changed. Coldness I couldn't place. I dismissed it as my imagination, a side effect of trauma and medication. "I'm handling everything at home, Blake. Don't worry about a thing," she'd say, patting my hand without quite meeting my eyes. "Just focus on getting better." I trusted her implicitly. We'd purchased our colonial-style home in Connecticut 3 years prior, mostly with the inheritance I'd received after my father passed. It was our dream home: hardwood floors, a wraparound porch, and enough space for the family we'd planned but never started. The property values in our neighborhood had increased substantially since our purchase, something Melissa mentioned frequently in recent months. It was my sister Amber who noticed something was off. She'd driven up from Philadelphia to spend a weekend helping out, and discovered several official-looking letters addressed to me that Melissa had forgotten to bring to the hospital. "Blake, I think you need to see these," Amber said, her voice controlled but her eyes betraying her concern. She handed me a stack of papers: mortgage statements, insurance documents, and correspondence from our bank. The documents told a story I couldn't comprehend. While I had been focusing on learning to walk again, Melissa had been busy. She'd leveraged a power of attorney I'd signed years ago, intended for emergencies, to transfer our home solely into her name. The mortgage refinancing paperwork showed her signature alone. My name had been systematically removed from our joint accounts. The final document was a petition for divorce, dated just 3 weeks after my accident. I stared at the papers, my hands trembling slightly, not from physical weakness, but from the shock of such calculated betrayal. 11 years of marriage erased while I couldn't defend myself. "She's been planning this?" I said finally, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. She waited until I couldn't fight back. Amber sat beside me, her expression a mixture of fury and compassion. "What are you going to do?" I looked down at my still healing body, then at the documents that stripped away not just my financial security but my belief in the person I'd trusted most. "I'm going to get better," I said quietly, "and then I'm going to fight." Recovery became my obsession. Physical therapy sessions that once felt impossibly difficult now had purpose beyond healing. Each painful step, each small victory of increased mobility was motivated by something more primal than health: the determination to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Melissa moved quickly. By the time I was discharged from the hospital 6 weeks after the accident, she had already filed the divorce papers and was living in our house with full control of our assets. I moved in with Amber, who had temporarily relocated to Connecticut to help me through my recovery. "You need documentation," Amber said one evening as we sat reviewing my financial records. "Every penny that went into that house, every contribution you made." Amber had always been the practical one. While I managed large-scale construction projects, she worked as a forensic accountant. The irony wasn't lost on me that her professional skills would now be applied to dissecting my failed marriage. I began the painstaking process of retracing our financial history. Bank statements, tax returns, the inheritance documents, property records, everything had to be cataloged and analyzed. I contacted the bank that handled my father's estate and requested documentation proving the source of the down payment on our home. "Your wife claimed the funds were jointly earned," said Mr. Harrington, my father's longtime financial advisor, his voice conveying disbelief. "I found that peculiar, considering I personally handled the transfer of your inheritance funds. Can you provide documentation confirming that?" I asked, feeling a small surge of hope. "Already compiling it," he assured me. "Your father was meticulous about his wishes. Those funds were explicitly designated for you alone. Finding the right attorney proved challenging. I needed someone who understood both property law and the complexity of cases involving power of attorney abuse. After 3 consultations with attorneys who seemed more interested in billable hours than justice, I met David Chun. "This is a clear case of fraudulent conveyance," Chun said after reviewing my documents during our first meeting. His office was modest but organized, much like the man himself. "Your wife took advantage of your incapacitation to transfer assets that were primarily yours. The power of attorney she used was not intended for self-dealing." "Can we prove that?" I asked. "We can certainly make a compelling case," Chun replied, studying the inheritance documentation, particularly with the clear paper trail showing your inheritance funded 75% of the home purchase. Connecticut courts typically recognize inheritance as separate property, not marital assets to be divided equally. I nodded, understanding the strategy was taking shape. "How long will this take?" Chun leaned back in his chair. "I won't sugarcoat this, Mr. Thompson. We're looking at a prolonged legal battle. Your wife has possession of the property and control of the accounts. She'll claim entitlement based on her contributions to the marriage. We'll need to methodically dismantle that argument with evidence." "I have time," I replied, "and motivation." That evening, as Amber and I organized documents into chronological order, she paused to look at me. "You're different," she observed. "Different how?" "Focused, determined. Before all this, you were always accommodating, always wanting to keep peace with Melissa. Maybe too much so." I considered her words. I trusted her completely. That was my mistake. I sorted through another batch of bank statements. "I won't make that mistake again." The legal proceedings began in earnest 3 months after my discharge from the hospital. By then, I had regained enough strength to walk without assistance, though long periods of standing still caused significant discomfort. Chun advised me to use a cane during court appearances, not for sympathy, but because I genuinely needed it after sitting through hours of legal proceedings. Our first court date was for a preliminary hearing. Melissa arrived with her attorney, a polished woman from a prestigious Hartford firm. Melissa looked surprised to see me mobile, her eyes widening slightly before settling into a practiced neutral expression. She had expected to face a broken man. Instead, she found herself confronted by someone systematically rebuilding himself. "Mr. Thompson claims his wife took advantage of his incapacitation following a life-threatening accident," Chun stated to the judge. "We have documentation demonstrating that the property in question was purchased primarily with Mr. Thompson's separate inheritance funds, not marital assets." Melissa's attorney countered immediately. "Mrs. Thompson contributed significantly to the marriage over their 11 years together. The property transfer was part of responsible financial planning during an uncertain time." The legal battle quickly became technical. Melissa's team argued that her signature had always been on our joint accounts, that she had managed our household finances throughout our marriage, and that the power of attorney gave her legitimate authority to make financial decisions. Our side methodically presented evidence of the inheritance funds, the timing of the transfer coinciding with my most vulnerable period, and expert testimony regarding the proper and improper uses of power of attorney. "Your Honor," Chen argued during a crucial hearing 6 months into proceedings, "Mrs. Thompson executed these transfers within weeks of Mr. Thompson's accident, when he was heavily medicated and physically incapable of defending his interests. The timing alone suggests opportunism rather than legitimate financial planning. The process was grueling. Depositions, financial disclosures, and court appearances drained my energy and resources." Melissa rejected 2 settlement offers, confident in her legal position. Her attorney painted me as financially controlling, suggesting the inheritance had been coming led with marital assets through joint accounts, thus becoming marital property. During her deposition, Melissa was asked directly about her motivations. "When did you first consider divorce?" Chen asked her. "We had been having problems for years," she replied smoothly. "The accident merely precipitated the inevitable. Yet there are no records of marriage counseling, separation discussions, or any documentation of these problems prior to Mr. Thompson's accident," Chen noted. "In fact, Text messages between you and Mr. Thompson in the weeks before his accident indicate plans for an anniversary trip. Melissa's composure slipped momentarily. Plans change. Indeed they do, Chen agreed, particularly when property values increase by 30% in a neighborhood, as they did in yours last year. Through the exhausting legal process, I found unexpected support. Former colleagues brought meals and offered transportation to appointments. Neighbors expressed shock at Melissa's actions, some providing statements about our seemingly happy marriage before the accident. My physical therapist offered discounted sessions when my insurance benefits began to run low. Most surprisingly, I found community in a support group for divorcees facing particularly contentious proceedings. Initially attending at Amber's suggestion to help process my emotions, I discovered others who had experienced similar betrayals. Their stories resonated with me, and sharing my experience seemed to help them as well. You're handling this with remarkable composure, noted Eleanor, a retired teacher whose husband had left her after 32 years of marriage. Many of us fell apart completely before finding our footing. I can't afford to fall apart, I admitted, but I understand the impulse. As the case dragged into its 14th month, Melissa's resolve began to waver. Her attorney requested a settlement conference, suggesting they might be open to negotiation. Chen advised caution. They're feeling pressure, he explained. The judge's preliminary rulings on the inheritance funds have been favorable to our position, but don't expect a complete surrender. The conference was tense but productive. Melissa finally acknowledged the inheritance component of the home purchase, though she continued to argue for substantial equity based on her contributions to the marriage. We negotiated terms regarding the sale of the property and division of proceeds. As we left the conference room, Melissa pulled me aside. The first time we'd spoken directly in over a year. You could have let this go, she said quietly. Found another place to live, moved on. I regarded her for a moment. This woman I had once loved completely, now almost unrecognizable to me. This was never just about the house, I replied. It was about truth and consequences. 18 months after discovering Melissa's betrayal, the court issued its final ruling. The judgment validated what I had known all along. The house was substantially purchased with my separate property funds. The transfer had occurred under questionable circumstances, and the power of attorney had been misused. The judge ordered the property sold, with 70% of proceeds allocated to me and 30% to Melissa, reflecting both the original contribution from my inheritance and recognition of her contributions during the marriage. Additionally, Melissa was required to provide an accounting of funds transferred from our joint accounts during my hospitalization and to return any amounts deemed excessive. Not a complete victory, Chen acknowledged as we reviewed the judgment, but substantively favorable. The court recognized the fundamental injustice while acknowledging the complexities of long-term marriages. I nodded, feeling not triumph but resolution. It's enough. The house sold quickly, for considerably more than we had paid. As I signed the closing documents, I felt a chapter of my life definitively ending. The colonial with the wraparound porch had represented my future with Melissa. Now it would fund a different future entirely. I used a portion of my proceeds to repay Amber for her tremendous support, despite her protests. Another portion went to secure a modest but comfortable condominium closer to downtown, accessible without navigating stairs, my leg having healed but still troublesome during weather changes. The remainder I invested, having learned valuable lessons about financial autonomy. The support group that had sustained me through the darkest periods had become an important part of my life. What began as a healing mechanism evolved into something more purposeful. Working with a local community center, I helped establish a more formal organization providing both emotional support and practical resources for people facing similar situations. Betrayal Recovery Network. I explained to the small group gathered for our first official meeting in a community center conference room. Because what we've experienced isn't just divorce. It's a fundamental breach of trust that requires specific recovery tools. The network grew steadily, attracting not just divorcees but others who had experienced profound betrayals. Business partners defrauded, adult children exploited by parents, friends deeply deceived. Each story different, yet connected by the common thread of broken trust and the struggle to rebuild. I partnered with local attorneys, including Chun, who offered pro bono consultations to members facing complex legal challenges. Financial advisors provided workshops on rebuilding economic security after significant losses. Mental health professionals helped develop resources addressing the unique psychological impact of betrayal. On the second anniversary of my accident, I stood at the front of a room filled with people whose lives had been shattered and were now being meticulously reassembled. Some faces I recognized from my earliest support group meetings. Eleanor, now helping others navigate retirement after divorce. Michael, rebuilding his small business after embezzlement by his brother. Sarah, recovering from her husband's hidden gambling addiction that had decimated their savings. 2 years ago today, my life changed irreversibly. I began, not just because of the physical injuries which have largely healed, but because of what followed. A betrayal that forced me to re-examine everything I thought I knew about my marriage and myself. I paused, noting the understanding in their eyes. No pity, just recognition. I lost my home, temporarily lost my mobility, and discovered my marriage had been built on shifting sand. But standing here now, I can say with complete honesty that I've gained far more than I lost. As I spoke, I realized the truth of my words. The accident and Melissa's betrayal had stripped away pretense and comfort, forcing me to confront fundamental questions about trust, resilience, and purpose. The answers hadn't come easily or quickly, but they had come. Our network exists because we understand something crucial, I continued. Betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can instead be the beginning of a more authentic one. After the meeting, as I gathered my materials, I noticed a text message from Amber. Dad would be proud of what you've built from this. I certainly am. I smiled, thinking of my father, a practical man who had valued integrity above all else. His inheritance had been intended to provide security. Instead, it had become the catalyst for something far more valuable. A reclamation not just of property, but of purpose. Walking to my car under a clear Connecticut sky, I felt the slight twinge in my leg that still accompanied weather changes. The physical reminder of that life-altering day would likely always remain. But so would the strength I had discovered in its aftermath. Strength I now dedicated to ensuring others found their way through similar darkness. The house was gone. The marriage was over. But I was far from done.